Hello everyone, I'm Dan Kristiansen, your 39th District State Representative, and I'd like to thank you for joining me here on Legislative Update. Back in 2005, Governor Greg Warr signed a budget the legislature passed that spent nearly $1 billion more than the state was taking in, despite an increase of incoming revenue. She did that knowing full well that the legislature was overspending. She said at the time, and I quote, "I don't like it, it's not sustainable, it's what's wrong with the budget in the state of Washington." 2 years later, the state had an additional $4.7 billion of incoming revenue over the previous biennium. That's nearly a $5 billion increase in income. And yet the legislature passed and the governor signed a budget that spent all of that additional revenue plus an additional $1.3 billion. So once again, the legislature spent more than the state was taking in, despite a sizable increase of incoming revenue. In the 2009-2011 budget, this legislature spent $885 million more than it took in. Now let's fast forward to today. The state is expecting nearly 14% more revenue over the next 2 years than the previous 2 years. That is an increase in revenue of almost $4 billion. Here's my point. We don't have a revenue problem in this state. We have a spending problem. History shows that even as revenues increase, the legislature continues to overspend. And yet people have camped out overnight in the rotunda of the state capitol to demand more of your hard-earned taxpayer dollars. The latest mantra shouted in the halls of the Capitol is close tax loopholes. So let's talk about that for a moment. The term loopholes makes many people think there's a mistake in the system, like something accidental or overlooked that allowed for ways to buck the system. That's really not the case at all. In Washington state, we don't have tax loopholes. We have tax incentives. The distinction between the two is important to understand because the tax incentives we have in Washington are no accident. They were actually enacted deliberately for very specific purposes. The primary purpose of a tax incentive is to create jobs. For example, in the first 10 years after the legislature adopted a tax incentive that exempted sales tax on manufacturing and equipment, it actually created over 285,000 new jobs in Washington state. Take away tax incentives and you take away jobs. More than 230,000 people in Washington are out of work and trying to find a job, including over 6,500 here in the 39th District. We shouldn't be putting more people out of work in an attempt to increase revenue for the government. And let's be frank, closing tax loopholes is just another way of saying, let's raise taxes. The best way to increase revenue to the state is by getting Washington working again. The bottom line, however, is that we need to get government spending in line with today's economic realities. Businesses and families have had to cut back. Few people have seen a 14% increase in their personal incomes. So when state government cries broke, when it's expecting an additional $4 billion in revenue over the next couple years, I say, give me a break. We have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. We don't need to increase taxes to put more people out of work. Instead, our focus should be on reforming state government, adopting a balanced and sustainable budget, and providing policies that will get Washington working again. As always, I invite your comments. You can email me from my website. You'll see the address on your screen. Again, my name is Dan Kristiansen. I'm your state representative. Thank you for joining me here again. Bye now.